Government exists to serve people. That the government collects money from you through taxation and later returns it to you through development, where you can have roads, you can have dams, you can have electricity, you can have water. And if you have roads, you have a main road and feeder roads. Basically, that is the role the government is supposed to play. But it reaches a level where the government is not in a position to meet your needs. And now this brings me to National Infrastructure Fund that President Ruto has been talking about and just launched it recently. What is this fund about? And Kenyans are wondering, how are they going to benefit from this? And before I get deeper into what this fund is all about, remember this: President Ruto has been saying that he's having trouble with the Kenyans because everywhere he visits, people are asking him, where are roads? Basically, the point is people want physical infrastructure, people want dams, people want roads, people want railway transport, people want access to water, people want a better life. That's the point the president is trying to raise. But the president is asking an important question: do we have enough resources to meet all your needs? So that's where it gets a little bit tricky. When you look at our economy, you then realize that we don't have money to meet all this. So before I go deeper into this fund, I want first of all to make you understand our national budget so that you see how much do we have for development. The national budget that was approved by cabinet is 4.6 trillion Kenyan shillings. That is for 2025-2026, where now 3.1 trillion will be for recurrent spending, 765 billion will be for development, 436.7 billion will be for county transfers, the money going to your counties, and 5 billion for contingency fund. By the way, if you went deeper, you'll be shocked to see that the money that goes into salary and wages is almost the money that goes into development. When you look at how much we have for development, definitely you'll agree with the president that more money is needed for development. But our budget doesn't allow that. So when we face such budgetary constraints, how then shall we raise money for development? It is because of that President Ruto says this.
Shida kubwa wananchi wanasema ni barabara. Wananchi wanahitaji barabara. Na ni kweli lazima tutafute mbinu mpya ya kujenga barabara. Hatuwezi kuendelea kujenga barabara vile tunajenga, kwa sababu hii haiwezi kutupatia zile barabara tunahitaji. Hii barabara hapa Nakuru kilomita 200 haitoshi. We need minimum at least 1,000 kilometers of new roads in Nakuru County. Na hiyo inahitaji pesa nyingi. Nimeweka makadirio ya zile barabara tunahitaji katika taifa letu la Kenya. Wananchi wameniuliza kila mahali. We need approximately 1.5 trillion ya kutengeneza hizo barabara. Na hiyo pesa haiwezi kupatikana kwa budget. Ni lazima tuanze kufikiria vizuri. Na mimi nitakubaliana, tayari tumeweka mpango kama serikali. And we are going to parliament ili tuanzishe hazina mpya ambayo inaitwa National Infrastructure Fund, ambayo sasa itatusaidia kuhakikisha kwamba tunajenga barabara za kutosha, na tukianzisha barabara tuwe na pesa ya kuhakikisha ya kwamba hiyo barabara imekamilika, tusiwe tunakwama barabarani. And therefore I want to tell the country, it is true, we need sufficient roads in Kenya if we have to grow our economy sufficiently, if we have to facilitate the people of Kenya to transport their agricultural produce, to participate in growing our economy. We need minimum another 10,000 kilometers of new tarmac in Kenya. And we need 1.5 trillion money to be able to drive that program. And for us to do that, we are going to have a national infrastructure fund, and we are going to look for resources in different ways, using the budget, using privatization, using capital markets, using private-public partnerships so that we can develop sufficient roads in all the areas of the Republic of Kenya. Kwa hivyo mimi nawaambia wabunge wajitayarishe, sisi kama serikali tumejitayarisha kwa sababu yale wananchi wanasema wanataka barabara zaidi. Ni kweli ama si kweli?
I know many of you wonder where is this figure that President Ruto is mentioning coming from. According to the Road Sector Investment Plan, that is RSIP 3, Kenya requires 4 trillion Kenyan shillings over the next decade, where 1 trillion Kenyan shillings for maintenance and 3 trillion Kenyan shillings for new development. Yet funding for capital projects remain limited due to constrained borrowing capacity and annual maintenance needs of approximately 253 billion Kenyan shillings, which far exceed the 100 billion Kenyan shillings collected through the Road Maintenance Levy Fund, established primarily for maintenance of road assets rather than expansion and development. Entirely, when you look at all these, you'll agree with the president that we want more development, but we do not have enough funding to meet all that you are demanding from the government. So as a responsible government, what do you have to do? You have to source resources to give people what they want. And that's where now National Infrastructure Fund comes in. Let's now break down this National Infrastructure Fund. President William Ruto's National Infrastructure Fund is essentially a government vehicle designed to pool money specifically for building and upgrading major public infrastructure, such as energy, water, roads, and even digital systems. Without relying on external borrowing or borrowing from China, World Bank, IMF, and these other global financial institutions. So how does this fund basically work? It will rely on multiple domestic sources such as NSSF contributions from road users. You'll pay some tolls. There's also fuel levy, and possibly this will include private investors through public-private partnerships. So this money, once it is pulled together, it is then directed only into infrastructure that generate economic returns, meaning projects that eventually pay for themselves: toll roads, logistic parks, industrialized zones. Now, this is where it gets tricky. As I said, President Ruto is saying that many Kenyans want development. But when you understand what this National Infrastructure Fund is about, is that it wants to pull resources from private investors, from NSSF and other sources. But at the end of it, there must be a return. Because you as a private investor, when you put your money somewhere, what do you expect in return? Definitely, you expect to earn something. So meaning that these projects that President Ruto wants to do are those projects that will be able to give people their money back. And we are seeing that happening. That's why we are tolling our roads. That as much as you want development, then there must be a question: what is the economic benefit of that road? Okay, you want a road to pass through your area, then ask a simple question: is it just for convenience so that you can walk from point A to point B, or there's an economic return? So that is something that Kenyans should also ponder about, because as you ask for development, then also ask yourself basic questions. What is that road going to do in terms of economic activity? Is it going to generate some economic returns, maybe to the government or to those who invested their money? Now, let me give you just a basic example here where we have NSSF. Remember this, NSSF is a pensioners fund. You've contributed to NSSF, and NSSF decides to invest your money in infrastructure. So at the end of it, NSSF should be in a position to have returns, so that NSSF is able to pay you as a contributor to the fund. Basically, that is how it is. So meaning NSSF is not just going to invest in development infrastructure without expecting a return. That again informs you why it is important that when you people ask for development, you should also ask yourselves basic questions. What is our economic contribution toward that, so that people don't keep this socialist mindset that, for us, our work is just to vote in a government and then sit back and wait for development. It doesn't happen that way. People must be economically active. Now, on the issue of NSSF, President Ruto has been talking so robustly about national savings, that we increase our savings from this amount to that amount. If we continue doing this, then as a country we shall have enough savings that we can then divert into development. And that's why you're seeing NSSF being involved in projects such as Rironi Nakuru Mau Summit. But I know the skepticism where people are asking, where are you taking our money? You shouldn't take our money into projects that may not have any returns, because people who are contributing to NSSF, when they retire, they expect their money back. So they are like, okay, how about if we invest in a project that doesn't return our money? I want you to watch this video where President Ruto talked, as I mentioned, robustly, effectively, confidently about NSSF, where we are increasing our savings, so that you understand why President Ruto is now talking about us funding our own projects, because he's confident that we have funds. And before you even listen to what President Ruto said about our savings, let me mention this. For every project that is supported by the national government, President Ruto is attaching savings to that. Look at Fuliza. There's a saving that when you borrow money from the government, some money is deducted for your savings. Also, we have Nyota. You know what Nyota is? Where the youth are also saving. So at the end of it, you'd realize that when there's a national fund, what happens is the government makes sure that you save some money. And eventually, when that money is saved, the government will ask you to give it for development. Now, listen to President Ruto as he talks about our national savings.
The reason why we made a decision as government, and I drove that decision of saying, let us do more savings. Today, I can proudly tell the country that we have improved our public savings from 320 billion in 2022. We are now closing to 600 billion before the end of this year. So, and as we improve our savings, we will make it easier for resources to be available.
When money is available, what do? You invest that money. That's why I say this, that the government has been so focused on ensuring that we save more, so that eventually that money can be taken into development. Essentially, this is a good move that will reduce Kenya's debt exposure by using locally raised, self-sustaining capital instead of foreign loans, as I mentioned, loans from World Bank, IMF, China. Those sovereign loans, for sure, are heavy on our economy, and we can't continue borrowing. So generally, this is President Ruto's selling point. To keep infrastructure momentum going, we must not just depend on sovereign debt. Instead, we should just raise our own money. So in this case, the government is targeting to attract institutional investors like insurance companies, pensions, with safe and long-term returns. That's why you even heard President Ruto talk about capital markets. So eventually, this is what will happen. We shall have user pay systems, toll roads, no taxpayer burden forever. I've mentioned that user pay systems, you need to understand what that means. It means that for you to use that road, I think I mentioned this, you have to pay. That's the point President Ruto is making, that we want national infrastructure fund. But when that money is directed into a certain project, for you to use it, you must do what? You must pay. And generally, that is what these user pay systems are about. However, this approach is facing some criticism. People are saying that this is likely to commercialize essential services. For instance, if there is Rironi Nakuru Mau Summit Highway, why should people pay? Because people feel that we are already taxed. You tax us fuel levy. So there's a lot of money that the government is receiving from citizens through taxation. So why should people again pay to use a road that has been built for them? That's why people have an issue with this National Infrastructure Fund. Additionally, people are asking simple questions, questions about governance and corruption risks. Because what we are having is, we can still collect money, we can save money, or we can raise money as National Infrastructure Fund, or we can pool resources so that we can support this National Infrastructure Program. But people are asking, how is that fund going to be managed? Because it is likely for people to raise that fund and then people just steal it. That is a relevant question. How is the government prepared to make sure that our resources are not stolen? When people contribute to savings and a few people steal the money, for sure, people will lose trust in supporting National Infrastructure Fund. So, as much as the government also wants to raise money through this National Infrastructure Fund, the government should also be prepared to address issues around corruption or governance. We understand that we shouldn't continue relying on foreign loans, but the government should also be responsible. And the government should also look into issues to do with double taxation, because we still pay taxes. Kiharu Member of Parliament has argued in this video that there is no need for the government to continue taxing people and still ask them to pay to use a public infrastructure. Listen to his argument before I give my conclusive statements.
The road from Nairobi to Nakuru, I've been talking about it for many times. The road was anticipated earlier to cost Kenya around 160 billion Kenya shillings. Now we have seen that has been revised upwards to around 200 billion Kenya shillings. A 40 billion increment with no increment in kilometers, just possibly maybe increment in interests. This is the issue about that road, that there is no country in our region that can afford to toll a corridor road, economically speaking. And it is a wrong model for Kenya to think you can toll Nairobi, Nakuru, or up to Mau Summit Road, because it can't work economically. And I'm just here asking the people in the western part of Kenya, all the way, the people who go to Nakuru from Nairobi, the people who use that road in North Rift, South Rift, Western Kenya, Nyanza, and all the regions that primarily use the highway. These are Kenyans who pay taxes in all its forms. They pay VAT, they pay pay, they pay all manner of taxes. On top of that, the users of Nairobi-Nakuru Highway also pay fuel levy. The government development agenda in terms of roads is domiciled around the taxes Kenyans pay and also fuel levy. Kenyans who already pay taxes for making roads, why are they being made to pay to use the road from Nairobi to Nakuru? That is more than triple taxation. And the road should be built, and Kenya has many avenues. Kenya has been borrowing currently for the recent 1 year. Kenya borrows 3.5 billion Kenya shillings every single day. It therefore means if we optimally allocate the resources that Kenya is borrowing every day, this road we can be building 3 kilometers because it's costing 1 billion shillings per kilometer. We can be building 3 kilometers every day. It will take us 60 days to have built the road from Nairobi to Nakuru without having to make residents pay and without having it operate as a PPP. And the major egregious issue on that on that road is that all the other private sector investors have shunned the model of PPP on the road because it's not viable commercially. If you look even yesterday, I am glad that even newspapers, I saw Business Daily actually covered that the Nairobi Expressway is making losses, is actually widening the loss. With the traffic we see on the road, it is making losses. Yet the government is forcing NSSF to use money for workers to do what the government ought to have done in building roads. The government is deliberately forcing NSSF to sink workers' money because it will never recover this money. And that is why a project like a road is deemed to be a public good. Public goods are never to be paid to use. And that is why you can never recoup money by charging. You build them using conventional taxes and conventional levies like the fuel levy. And this issue of tolling, definitely, NSSF is sinking workers' money. It will never recover. But more importantly, we cannot subject Kenyans who use Nairobi-Nakuru highway into paying for the road, yet they already participate in paying taxes and also paying levies like the fuel levy.
This is a cogent argument that why taxers and at the same time want us to pay to use a public good. To be honest, a road like that is a public good. This National Infrastructure Fund is raising many questions. But again, do we want this development at this faster pace? Yes, it is true Kenyans are demanding development, but I've always asked a simple question. Even in the previous video I recorded, I asked, why are we not talking about, factories? Why are we not talking about our own output? What are we producing as a people? Because that's what Kenyans are not asking. Are Kenyans asking for roads for convenience or to support their economic activities? For sure, we need a discussion around that. Because, I repeat, there's no need for people to demand development when they're not engaged in serious economic activities. Because, listen folks, as I mentioned again, this socialist mindset, we just have to do away with it. Because for me, I've taken my time to understand how Kenyans sometimes think, where everything is just about the government has not done ABCD and all that. But people are not asking themselves also, what are you engaged in economically? We're not just going to build you good roads and later you just go to your home. No, there must be an economic benefit. If that happens, then it makes sense to make sure you have good roads. Additionally, John Mbadi once stated this, that previously the mistakes we made were we borrow money without linking it to any project. Now, in this case, given that the government is so focused on road infrastructure and these other physical infrastructure, and people find it hard, to pay to use that infrastructure, why can't we have a borrowing that is linked to a project? Okay, we still understand that our public debt is so huge to a level foreign lenders do not want to lend us money. So generally, when you look at this from different angles, you'd realize that we are a little bit stuck, because for sovereign loans, to some extent, we can get them because of our external borrowing being so huge to a level people do not want to lend us. Again, now when you come back to Kenya, Kenyans still say, but you are taxing us. This is too much on us. Again, when you look at industries, you don't see any level of industrialization in the country. But again, when you look at it from this perspective of citizens want roads. That is something that is so tricky, it is so complex, but we need a national conversation where now we can say, okay, we want development, but as a people from this region, this is what we are also engaged in economically. I just want you to listen to John Mbadi so that you begin to have understanding of our borrowing or our external borrowing, our economy, and our approach to development. Just listen to John Mbadi. Conclusively, it is important that we start discussions about our economy and also asking ourselves what economic activities are we engaged in. So enjoy this clip from John Mbadi.
Must work on linking projects to loans. We cannot borrow loans for general budgetary support. Actually, where we lost it, Mr. Speaker and Madam Speaker and honorable members, is from 2014, we shifted our borrowing strategy from specific donor-funded projects to general support. What that means is that you do your maths, you calculate you do your estimate, and then you get your revenue, and whatever is remaining, you put to debt. So debt comes to this country, like the Eurobond, without going to specific projects. How then would you pay that loan if it does not fund value-adding projects or proper investment in public assets? So that is something that we must do going forward. I'm talking about now going forward, because what has happened, we'll have to deal with it, but going forward, that is what we must do.